So you've just started playing Hunt Showdown, and because Hunt has a reputation of being difficult, you wanted to do this properly. You watch beginner guides, copy loadouts from experienced players, and spend way too much time looking at tier lists. You browse Reddit, change your settings, or maybe even buy a DLC because someone told you that this hunter is harder to see. Basically, you're doing everything that a new player is supposed to do. You're researching the game, trying to avoid stupid mistakes, and learning from people who are obviously much better than you. And after doing all of that, you still suck. And the uncomfortable truth is that this is probably not because you haven't watched enough guides yet. Some of the things you're doing specifically because you want to become better are actually keeping you bad. So today, I'm gonna ruin a few of them for you. And we should probably start with the first one a lot of people focus way too much on. Let's talk about your KDA. Because when you're new to Hunt, KDA probably feels like the best measurement for your skill. You started at 0.7, climbed up to 0.9. Eventually, you finally cross 1.0. Number goes up, so you're improving. Number goes down, so you're getting worse. Simple, right? Except it isn't. Because the moment you start caring about that number, you start protecting it. Maybe you don't push a fight because you're worried that it might hurt your KDA. Maybe you leave a bad situation instead of trying to figure out how to play around it. Maybe you start sitting further back because getting 1 kill and extracting is better than getting 2 kills and dying. And suddenly you stop asking yourself what you can learn from the situation. You're more focused on how to make sure that number doesn't go down. And I can totally understand why. Imagine you're playing with 2 of your other friends and you have the worst KD. Yeah, I would be embarrassed too. Nobody wants to be the guy with the worst KDA in their team. Because even if nobody says something, the number is still sitting there. And every time you look at it, it tells you exactly where you stand compared to everyone else. So of course you want to protect it. But here's the problem. You're not protecting your KDA because protecting it makes it better. You're protecting it because admitting you still suck at the game makes you feel worse. And ironically, that might be exactly why your KDA is still bad. Because getting better at Hunt requires experience. And experience isn't always pretty. Sometimes you need to take a fight that you're probably going to lose. Sometimes you need to try an aggressive play to figure out why it doesn't work in that situation. Sometimes you need to mess up a rotation, miss your shot, and get punished to understand what happened. All of those deaths look terrible on your KDA, but they teach you something that sitting 80 meters away from a gunfight will never do. And that's the trap. The better you want your KDA to look right now, the more likely you are to avoid situations that could make you better later. Your friend with a 1.5 KDA didn't get there because he protected his KDA all the time. Maybe he sit for hundreds of hours at 0.8 learning from his mistakes. So if your KDA is bad right now, good. It's supposed to. The embarrassing part is not to have a bad KDA while you're still learning. The embarrassing part would be staying bad because you're afraid your number will change. But maybe numbers aren't the reason why you're avoiding bad fights. Maybe you generally don't care if your KDA drops tonight. Because Hunt Showdown gives you something much worse to lose. Something you actually had to buy. And that expensive Mosin sitting in your inventory is the perfect example for it. You probably know exactly what weapon I'm talking about. The Mosin you picked up 3 matches ago. Maybe it belonged to a player you killed. Maybe it has an expensive skin with special ammo you cannot buy. And ever since you bought it home, it's sitting in your inventory. Not because you don't want to play it. You absolutely do. You're just waiting for the right moment, am I right? Maybe when your friends are coming online later. Maybe when you're feeling particularly confident. Or maybe when you have enough money that losing it doesn't hurt that much. So until then, it stays exactly where it is. And that is great. Except that Mosin sitting in your inventory is completely useless now. Seriously. If you're afraid of losing something, owning it is functionally the same as not owning it at all. And Hunt Showdown is incredibly good at making you forget that. Because Hunt Showdown doesn't just give you equipment, it gives each equipment a price. You know exactly what your loadout costs. And most importantly, Hunt Showdown makes absolutely sure you know what happens when you die. You lose everything. And that creates something called loss aversion. Humans generally don't experience gains and losses the same. Losing something we already have tends to hurt more than gaining something of similar value feels good. And Hunt Showdown builds an entire economy around that feeling. You don't just buy a Mosin. You're buying a Mosin with a feeling in the back of your head that someone will take it from you 20 minutes later. So if you're a new player without money, of course losing a $600 rifle feels terrible. There's nothing strange about that. Your brain is doing exactly what you expect it to do. It wants to protect something it considers valuable. The problem only starts when you start bringing that weapon into a match. Because now you're not making decisions based on the situation alone. You're making decisions based on what that decision might cost you. Maybe there's a fight you normally would take, but you're currently playing an expensive hunter. Maybe your team wants to push the bounty, but you're already carrying an expensive loadout. Maybe the situation becomes dangerous and suddenly extracting without getting the bounty feels pretty good, right? And none of those decisions look ridiculous on their own. And that's exactly what makes gear fear so difficult to notice. It doesn't usually feel like fear. It feels like being sensible. Why risk $1,000 loadout for one stupid fight? Why not save the Mosin for the next match? Why not extract now and use that hunter later? But eventually, you have to start asking yourself one simple question. Why did you buy the loadout in the first place? A Mosin isn't valuable because it costs that many hunt dollars. It's valuable because it lets you do things in a match that other weapons don't. The moment you're too afraid to use that advantage, you already removed the part that made this weapon valuable in the first place. And it gets especially worse when your loadout starts changing how you play. Because now the weapon that was supposed to give you more options is doing the exact opposite. You avoid decisions because you're afraid of what will happen if you fail. So if losing your loadout changes how you're willing to play, you probably shouldn't have bought that loadout in the first place. But maybe you're doing the complete opposite. You don't protect your weapons because you're barely owning them long enough to make them matter. Every few matches you're playing something completely different. And weirdly enough, that becomes the next problem. You're letting the result of your last match decide what happens next. Experimenting because you're new to hunt makes perfect sense. Actually, I would be more concerned if it didn't. There are dozens of weapons, different ammo types, different ranges and completely different ways to approach a fight. You don't know what you enjoy yet, so obviously you try things. Let's say you start with the sparks. You like the damage. You like fighting at ranges, and everything seems fine. Until you enter a compound and someone deletes you with a Romero. You were full health, he fired once, and you died. Well, maybe shotguns are just better. So the next match, you bring one, and everything is perfect. Until someone brings a Centennial and starts shooting at you from 40 meters away. You can't comfortably fight back, and you cannot close the distance. So eventually you die. And suddenly, the Centennial looks pretty good, right? So you buy one. And if you keep doing this long enough, you eventually played half the arsenal and haven't learned a single thing. Because the Romero didn't kill you because it is better than the sparks, but because you brought the sparks in a situation where the Romero excels. And the Centennial didn't prove that the Romero is bad either. You were simply trying to solve a 40-meter problem with a weapon that is designed to do something completely different. But instead of asking why the fight went wrong, you're replacing the most visible variable, your weapon. And suddenly, the person who killed you decides what loadout you will play next. The funny thing is that you don't even have to die for this to happen. You open a tier list. You watch a streamer, maybe search for the best beginner loadout. Someone puts a weapon in S tier, so you buy it. Someone destroys a trio with a particular loadout, so you play it too. And there's nothing wrong with listening to experienced players, but you're copying their answer without understanding the question it's supposed to solve first. And that's a mistake. A strong weapon doesn't solve bad positioning. A meta loadout doesn't give you better decision making. And copying a weapon that killed you doesn't answer the question why it killed you in the first place. So stop confusing the weapon that killed you with the reason why you died. Because eventually you have tried the expensive weapon. You've copied the strongest loadouts. You played the guns that keep killing you. And somehow, you're still dying, which creates a slightly uncomfortable problem. If your weapon wasn't responsible for your deaths, something else must be. Luckily, Hunt Showdown players are incredibly good at finding excuses. Maybe the other player got lucky with his headshot. Maybe the weapon he used is completely overpowered. Or maybe Hunt Showdown servers have incredibly bad tick rates. Those explanations sound different, but they serve the exact same purpose. Because admitting that you played terrible isn't a comfortable explanation. When we're winning a fight, taking responsibility feels great. We had better aim, we made smarter decisions, and we positioned ourselves perfectly. But when we lost, it wasn't really our fault. And probably the easiest explanation of it all is simply being unlucky. Imagine peeking the same window and getting shot at immediately. The other player misses, so you immediately go back into cover. A few seconds later, you re-peek the same window, except now your opponent is aiming directly at it. Your head appears where he expects it to be. He pulls the trigger and sends you immediately back to the lobby. And your first reaction is, of course he hits me with a lucky headshot. But what exactly is lucky about that situation? You literally showed him where your head will appear next. You gave him enough time to aim comfortably. And then you put your head in the crosshair again. He didn't have to predict your incredibly good movement. He simply waited for you to repeat your same mistake again. And that wasn't a lucky headshot from that player. You simply were painfully predictable. But maybe luck isn't the excuse you prefer. Maybe you think Hunt Showdown itself is terribly unbalanced. You hear someone sitting in the building with a shotgun. And you still walk through the doorway challenging it. 1 second later, you're watching the death screen again. And immediately, you know exactly what the problem was. Shotguns are simply overpowered in this game. But you willingly entered a situation where a shotgun excels. You're fighting the enemy's weapon at a distance where he dominates. And then you blamed the weapon for something it was designed to. And I already know what your usual response sounds like. What am I supposed to do against that player? He isn't moving, so I have to push him. Except You don't have to push him. You can rotate and approach the fight from somewhere else. You can pressure him to force a decision out of him. You can wait till the situation changes in your favor. Or you can simply leave because nothing else works. You might actually hate all of those options, but disliking your available options doesn't mean you have none. That shotgun never forced you to walk through a doorway. You chose his strongest fight and then complained afterwards. But when balancing isn't an option, we still have one more left. Maybe it's Hunt Showdown's terrible servers. You shoot at another player and somehow miss your shot. And then you shoot again and miss another time. And then he turns around and instantly headshots you. And suddenly, the explanation is obvious again. The server tick rate is complete garbage. All my shots cannot connect on those bad servers. There is only one slightly annoying problem with that explanation. The other player is connected to the same server and he's even playing the exact same game as you do. And somehow, his bullet managed to find you. Maybe the server didn't specifically ignore your bullet. Maybe the other player simply ain't better than you. And that's exactly why these explanations feel so attractive. Luck, balancing his servers, all move the responsibility somewhere else. When he's lucky, there's nothing you can change. When his weapon is broken, there's nothing you need to change. And when the server is bad, what can you do? You can queue for the next match and do the same problem again. And when the same situations happens over and over again, you already have a perfect explanation waiting for you. But when you actually want to understand your deaths, the question completely changes. When you die, instead of asking what killed you, you ask something much more uncomfortable. What did you do wrong that made this weapon able to kill you? Why did you peek the exact same angle again? Why did you willingly walk directly into a shotgun? Why were your shots missing while your opponents weren't? Those questions put the explanation to somewhere much less comfortable. Sometimes Hunt Showdown wasn't unfair to you. Sometimes you simply played like shit. And until you're willing to admit that possibility, you cannot correct it. But admitting that creates another uncomfortable problem. Because the game isn't always responsible. Maybe sometimes your setup is. Maybe your sensitivity is wrong. Maybe your FOV is holding you back. And maybe you have been playing Hunt Showdown with the wrong settings the whole time. And compared to admitting that your decision making needs work, that would be a wonderfully easy problem to fix. Because when you're struggling with Hunt, fixing your settings feels incredibly attractive. They give you a problem that feels completely controllable. Bad positioning takes hundreds of hours before you recognize patterns consistently. Understanding compounds requires playing them again and again. But changing your sensitivity takes around 15 seconds. You move a slider, enter the shooting range and immediately feel different. And because something feels different, it feels like progress. But changing something and understanding something are two completely different things. There's obviously a baseline your settings need to reach. Your game should run properly and your sensitivity should be comfortable. But once you've reached that baseline, constantly changing something is counterproductive. Every sensitivity change forces you to adjust. Every FOV change changes your movement. You're constantly changing the environment while expecting yourself to become consistent in it. And somehow, the solution is always another small adjustment. You're spending time fixing things that are easy to change because the difficult things take actual experience, and copying someone's settings doesn't change that. Because if you change your sensitivity 6 times this month already and you're still losing the exact same fights, your sensitivity probably isn't the reason you suck. At this point, we have taken every comfortable explanation from you, but there still has to be one objective left, something that doesn't care about excuses, settings or expensive loadouts. You either entered a match and won or you lost. Surely winning means you have improved, right? Unfortunately, that brings us to the last problem. Winning feels like the most objective measurement of success. You entered the match, fought other players and extracted successful. Surely that means that you did something correct, right? And obviously, winning a match is still the objective of Hunt Showdown. I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that losing is much better. The problem is what you conclude from the result afterwards. Imagine you're holding an angle and you decide to re-peek unnecessarily. The other player already knows where you are. He fires first, but he misses his first shot. You return the shot and immediately kill him. Great! You won the fight, but was re-peeking the same angle suddenly a good decision? Nothing about the decision changed because your opponent missed. You simply received a good outcome from a questionable decision. And the opposite can happen just as easily. You hear someone approaching and correctly reposition before he arrives. You create an advantageous angle and you catch him completely unprepared. Then you miss your shot, he flicks and headshots you. You lost. But that doesn't mean that repositioning was the wrong decision. The outcome only tells you what happened. It doesn't automatically tell you why it happened though. And confusing those two creates one of the worst feedback loops. Every decision that leads to a kill feels correct, and every decision that leads to a death feels wrong. So you begin reinforcing bad decisions whenever they work. And you abandon good ideas because you died. But that's not learning. It's just reading the scoreboard. And suddenly, everything we talked about in this video starts connecting. You protect your KDA because you want it to look better. You're protecting your expensive loadout because losing it feels horrible. You change weapons because the previous one produced bad results. You blame external factors because they explain an uncomfortable truth. You optimize settings because you're searching for better results. And finally, you use winning itself as proof that you improved. You spend all this time looking for evidence that you improved, but most of that evidence only tells you what happened. It doesn't necessarily tell you that you learned anything. And that's probably the biggest beginner mistakes underneath it all. You're trying to look like you're improving before you actually understand how to improve, which is admittedly a very horrible place for me to leave you. Because now I've spent the entire video taking away almost every measurement you thought you could trust. So congratulations. If you were feeling confident clicking on this video, I've probably fixed that by now. But don't worry, I'm not gonna spend an entire video telling you why you suck and then leave you there. Today was deliberately about destroying your expectations. Because building a better approach doesn't help you if you're still holding on to the old one. And now that we removed all of those ideas, there's one question left that actually matters. If none of those things reliably tell you that you're improving, how are you actually supposed to learn Hunt? That's exactly what we're going to talk about next week. We're going to look at why experienced players can start a new game and seemingly understand it incredibly quickly. More importantly, we're going to break down what they're doing differently while learning it. So if you want to learn how to actually improve, subscribing makes sense. Because next week, we're going to build something much better in their place.